On the night of March 20th, 1995, 17-year-old Julie Ferguson left work at the Linens and Things store in Greenbelt, Maryland, and prepared to go out with friends. She was a junior at Eleanor Roosevelt High School, a bright, vivacious teen known for her love of music and close bonds with her friends. Around 9:30 p.m., after closing up the store, Julie waited outside in the Greenway Shopping Center for two friends who had promised to give her a ride that evening. Moments before, she had reassured her mother by phone that her friends were on their way to pick her up. The area was well lit by a nearby liquor store, and Julie sat on a brick planter box with a soda and a shopping bag by her side. Sometime before 10 p.m., witnesses saw Julie casually chatting with the occupants of a red four-door car that had pulled up near where she waited. There were 3 people in the vehicle, reportedly 2 young men and a young woman, and by all accounts, Julie seemed comfortable speaking with them. Observers noted no signs of distress or struggle at that time. However, by the time her friends arrived just after 10 p.m., Julie had vanished without a trace. All that remained were her belongings on the curb, including a bag of clothes and her soda bottle. Alarmed, her friends contacted Julie's mother and questioned the liquor store manager, quickly realizing something was terribly wrong. Within hours, Greenbelt police, aided by police helicopters, began searching the area for the missing teen. Tragically, the search ended early the next morning. At around 5:20 a.m. on March 21st, a pair of workers on their way to their job spotted Julie's body near a wooded stretch of Daisy Lane in Glendale, about 5 miles from the shopping center. She was found fully clothed on the remote roadside, and the manner of her death was brutal. An autopsy later revealed that Julie had been strangled, and her throat had been slashed. There were no signs of essay, robbery, or any obvious motive for the attack. Simply put, there was absolutely nothing to explain why someone would target a normal girl who was just going about her evening. Julie's slaying sent shockwaves through the Greenbelt community, which was unaccustomed to such violent crime. In the days that followed, police worked around the clock interviewing dozens of people, but they struggled to develop solid leads. No immediate suspect emerged, and detectives could not determine a clear motive for the crime. Julie had no apparent enemies, and nothing obvious had been taken from her. Investigators quickly concluded that she had been abducted from the shopping center, but by whom and for what purpose remained a complete mystery. The only early clues were the witness accounts of the red car and the disturbing fact that some of Julie's personal items had been discarded along a roadway. Her ID, for instance, was later found tossed in the median of Greenbelt Road, about halfway between the mall and the location where her body was found. It appeared those responsible had scattered a few of her belongings while fleeing the area. The impact on Julie's peers was profound. 2 days after the slaying, well over 1,000 people gathered for a candlelight vigil at the Eleanor Roosevelt High School football field to mourn Julie and seek solace together. Grief counselors were made available to students overcome by the shock of losing a classmate in such a horrific way. Friends described feeling as if all the safety and all the security of their world had been stripped away overnight. Despite an intensive investigation in 1995, the case gradually went cold as months and then years passed without an arrest. The crime scene yielded little forensic evidence beyond some physical items belonging to Julie, and with no eyewitnesses to the abduction itself, detectives had few leads to pursue. About 5 years after the slaying, in March 2000, Prince George's County Police announced a renewed push in Julie's case, and with it, some intriguing new clues. Cold case investigators had spent months re-examining the evidence and re-interviewing witnesses. At a press conference on the case's 5-year anniversary, police revealed that previously overlooked witness accounts pointed to 3 suspects who might have been involved. Crucially, multiple people had reported seeing a red Volkswagen Jetta in the Greenway Center parking lot the night Julie disappeared. The occupants were described as 2 men and 1 woman in their early 20s, and all were noted to be black. One witness saw Julie leaning in the window of this car, talking to the occupants shortly before she vanished. Another witness came forward to say they had spotted a similar vehicle in the early morning hours parked along a remote stretch of Daisy Lane, with its headlights on. Notably, this was in the very area where Julie's body was later discovered, giving rise to suspicions that this may have been the occupants of the vehicle dumping her body. By the time that witness passed the spot again, the car was gone. Around this same period, police explored a lead involving a different possible suspect entirely. They identified a person of interest, who was a white male who was believed to have been preying on young women near the University of Maryland campus in the mid-1990s. This individual was thought to have attempted abductions in the area, raising suspicions that Julie could have been a victim of a serial predator. However, after extensive efforts, investigators were unable to track that man down or link him to the crime. The focus remained on the trio in the red car, even as the case once again began to stall for lack of concrete proof. Over the years, several theories have emerged about who was responsible for the slaying of Julie Ferguson, but many have led to dead ends. Aside from the theories already discussed, 2 young men who knew Julie were also investigated as possible suspects. However, both of them failed to match up to DNA found at the scene, and there was nothing concrete to link either men to the abduction and subsequent events. The primary theory that law enforcement still focuses on centers around the 3 unknown individuals in the red car. Investigators have urged any of these 3 people to come forward for questioning in an effort to potentially clear their names if they weren't involved. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here with a reminder for you to share this video with 2 of your friends or your family members. Also, remember to hit like and subscribe. And also, remember to ring the notification bell and turn on all notifications for my channel. Robert Commu was, by all accounts, a respectable individual leading a quiet life in Brant County, Ontario in Canada. He worked as a welder at a fabrication company in nearby Cambridge and rented part of a house on West River Road in the community of Paris, Ontario. The last day anyone saw Robert was Sunday, March 31st, 1996, Easter Sunday. He spent that day around his home on West River Road. In the late afternoon, around 5 p.m., a neighbor's daughter noticed Commu outside changing a tire on his truck. By early evening, that same neighbor grew concerned. She hadn't seen Robert since and decided to check on him, and what she found has haunted the community ever since. Around 7 p.m., the neighbor arrived at Commu's residence and discovered the front door wide open, with music blaring from inside on repeat. According to reports, the song on repeat was by the band Hootie and the Blowfish, though I wasn't able to find out which song it was. I'm not overly familiar with this band, but my understanding from a quick Spotify journey is that their songs are fairly upbeat in general. Given the theories about what happened, let's just say that the type of music playing may have provided some further insight into Robert Commu's headspace. But I digress. Stepping inside, the neighbor found Commu's dog alone in the house. The loyal pet was unharmed except for a small cut on her head, suggesting she may have been struck or injured during whatever transpired. Oddly, Commu's wallet was still in the house and his pickup truck sat in the driveway. It appeared he hadn't planned to go anywhere far. Scattered CDs littered the floor as if there had been a disturbance. Outside, the driveway revealed peculiar tire tracks, as though another vehicle had peeled away at high speed. Alarmed, the neighbor ventured down toward the nearby banks of the Grand River, a spot Robert often frequented on walks with his dog, and called out for him into the dusk. With darkness closing in and Robert still nowhere to be found, the neighbor contacted the Brant County, Ontario Provincial Police to report him missing. By the next morning, April 1st, it was evident that Robert Commu had truly vanished. When he failed to show up for work at his welding job that Monday, those who knew him grew even more concerned. Simply put, Robert wasn't the sort of person to go AWOL from his responsibilities, so this was incredibly out of character. Police officers had already been alerted by the neighbor's call the night before, and they arrived at Commu's home to investigate the strange scene. They found the door still ajar, the stereo still looping the same song, and Commu's dog anxiously waiting for her owner. There were no signs of Robert himself. It was as if he had stepped out briefly and intended to return, but something prevented him from coming back. The Brant County OPP immediately launched an intensive search of the area. They brought in a canine unit to track Robert's scent, hoping the dogs might lead them to a clue in the surrounding fields or along the riverbank. Unfortunately, heavy rain had started that evening, and the downpour washed away any reliable scent trails that might have existed. Undeterred, authorities called in a helicopter to scan the region from above, and officers on foot combed through brush, woods, and along the cold, swift waters of the Grand River. Despite these efforts, no trace of Robert was found that night or in the days immediately following. As the investigation unfolded, police canvassed the neighborhood and spoke with those who knew Robert. Investigators interviewed his family members, friends, co-workers, and acquaintances, trying to piece together any hints of what might have happened or where he could be. Nothing in Commu's financial records or personal life offered an obvious lead. For instance, there were no sudden bank withdrawals, no suspicious notes left behind, and no known conflicts with enemies. In fact, as a result of the investigation, it came out that he didn't seem to have any enemies to speak of whatsoever. That said, that didn't mean all was well in his life. He had been described as feeling despondent in the time leading up to his disappearance, grappling with the fallout of a romantic relationship, and worry over a relative's serious illness. In fact, Robert had recently asked his on-and-off girlfriend to marry him, and she had declined his proposal, which hurt him deeply. Still, those close to him insist he was coping, and had even mentioned future plans. These personal struggles led some to wonder if Robert might have simply left of his own accord, or chose to end himself in despair, but evidence for those theories was scarce. Early on, police received one intriguing tip. There were reports that just days before he vanished, Robert Commu had been seen in the company of two unidentified men driving a pickup truck. According to a neighbor's recollection, on the weekend prior to his disappearance, two men, believed to be fellow welders, had come by to visit Robert at his home. It struck her as a bit odd, as she wasn't sure why they would visit. Now, personally, I don't see what sounds so odd about a welder having two welders show up at his house. People tend to socialize with people in their own profession, but regardless, this lead appears to have been taken as significant by investigators. Also, I'm not entirely certain how the neighbor was so certain that the men were welders, but once again, I digress. And as always, it's important to note that, for open investigations, we simply don't have access to all the evidence, and there may be a reason why this event has been given so much weight. This lead suggested that Commu's disappearance might not have been entirely accidental, and perhaps these individuals knew something about where he went or what happened. The police appealed to the public for any information about these two men, hoping they might come forward or be identified. Unfortunately, that avenue didn't immediately solve the case. The identities and intentions of those men in the pickup truck remain unknown to this day, and it's not confirmed if they were connected to Robert's fate in any way. Weeks turned into months, and still there was no sign of Robert Commu. Over the years, the case gradually grew cold, though law enforcement continued to keep Commu in their missing persons database and would periodically revisit the file as tips trickled in. At one point, in the late 1990s, Commu's brother even sought out the help of a psychic in desperation. The psychic claimed to have a vision that Robert was struck on the head with a shovel and buried in a shallow grave on his own property. This gruesome suggestion prompted the family to arrange a thorough search of the grounds around the house. They brought in specialized equipment capable of detecting disturbances under the soil, hoping to find any hint of a burial site. The exhaustive search, however, yielded nothing, absolutely no remains, and no clues. The psychic who offered this quote-unquote assistance ghosted them afterwards, leaving the family to believe they had been taken in by a grifter. In the absence of concrete evidence, a number of theories have been debated about what happened to Robert Commu. Officially, the Brant County OPP has never declared the case a slaying or an accident. It remains an open missing person investigation. One possibility considered early on was that Robert, distraught over personal problems, might have chosen to leave his life behind voluntarily. According to his friends, Robert had once dated a woman who later assumed a new identity and essentially vanished to start life anew. Some have theorized that Robert was aware that disappearing was indeed possible because of this experience. In theory, he could have decided to do something similar, walking away from his job, family, and everything he knew to begin again somewhere else under a different name. His family holds on to a glimmer of hope that this could be the case, dreaming that perhaps he is out there living quietly under a new identity. Another theory suggests that Commu may have walked away from his life in a very literal way, given his emotional state around that time. Investigators learned he was upset about his girlfriend rejecting his marriage proposal and worried about a close relative's cancer diagnosis. Depression and despair might have overwhelmed him. If he had chosen to end himself somewhere in the remote countryside or the river, that might explain why he was never found. However, supporters of this theory acknowledge a major counterpoint. No physical evidence has ever surfaced, despite extensive searching. Further, those who knew him didn't think that he would simply leave his dog abandoned and helpless. They've also questioned why he wouldn't leave a note to explain the situation to his family and friends. That said, people don't always leave these notes, and oftentimes they're in a mental state where they truly believe no one will miss them, even if this is the furthest thing from reality. Another theory suggests that he may have met his end accidentally. Those familiar with the area note that there are old open wells that are essentially concealed in the rural countryside that could function as traps. Some speculate that he may have gone for a country stroll to work off some stress or frustration, gone off the beaten path, and fallen into one of these wells. Many lean toward a more sinister explanation: foul play at the hands of others. The clues at the scene hint at a possible confrontation. The hurried tire tracks could indicate another vehicle leaving in a rush, and the dog's minor injury raises questions about a scuffle. Many believe that the loyal pooch may have come to the defense of her owner and been beaten back by the assailants. This theory tends to turn upon the two unidentified men in the pickup truck as being the responsible individuals. Theorists have speculated that perhaps an argument or unexpected incident occurred that resulted in Robert being taken away against his will. Because Commu lived in a somewhat rural area, it's conceivable that if a crime occurred, the perpetrators had the cover of seclusion to do it quietly. Without solid evidence, no theory can be proven, and at present, the case of Robert Commu remains a disturbing unsolved mystery with no resolution in sight. Deep in the remote sands of the Gobi Desert, a terrifying legend has taken shape. Mongolian herders whisper of a deadly creature lurking beneath the dunes, a worm-like monster known locally as the Olgoi Khorkhoi, or large intestine worm. In Western lore, it's called the Mongolian death worm, an alleged beast said to kill with a mere touch, or even at a distance. According to traditional accounts, this blood-red, sausage-shaped creature can spit corrosive venom and even deliver lethal electric shocks to its victims. Tales of the Olgoi Khorkhoi have circulated in Mongolia for generations, long before outsiders heard of it. The very name paints a visceral image. Locals liken it to a cow's intestine, vividly conveying its reported shape and coloration. Early 20th century expeditions in Mongolia brought the first Western documentation of this legend. In 1919, American explorer Roy Chapman Andrews, often styled as a quote-unquote real-life Indiana Jones, met with Mongolian officials who startled him with an unusual request. They asked if he could capture a live specimen of this elusive creature and bring it back to them for further examination. Andrews, being an Indiana Jones type, of course agreed to this, but was unable to ever locate a real Olgoi Khorkhoi. Andrews noted that none of them had seen the animal themselves, but all were convinced it was a legitimate beast. Notably, even the well-educated Mongolian prime minister recounted stories of the supposed animal to him, indicating that this wasn't simply a backcountry superstition. These meetings, and the quest for the creature, were recounted in Andrews' 1926 book On the Trail of Ancient Man, which introduced the West to the Mongolian deathworm legend. Through the 1920s and 1930s, Soviet researchers in the Gobi also collected local tales. And for a little bit of historical context, at the time, Mongolia had fallen fully into the Soviet sphere of influence. Explorers A.D. Simakov and Ivan Yefremov heard many stories of the Olgoi Khorkhoi, consistently depicting a lethal sausage-like worm that lived underground and surfaced after rains. If a person spotted the creature, the only advice was to flee. These early reports agreed on the core image of the death worm, a burrowing, legless nightmare, but beyond that, details varied wildly. Some Mongolian storytellers swore the worm was barely a foot long, while others insisted it could grow as large as a man. It was described as red or brown, sometimes with indistinct features at its ends, leading some to say it had spikes, or that you couldn't tell head from tail. Some stories of the creature included more obvious fantastical elements, like suggesting that it could fly away if it was prevented from burrowing. During Mongolia's communist era in the mid-20th century, talk of the death worm was reportedly discouraged or outright banned, reinforcing an air of mystery around it. Despite the silence, the legend lived on in nomadic oral tradition, awaiting a time when curious outsiders would pick up its trail. By the late 20th century, the Mongolian death worm had captured the imagination of adventurers and scientists alike. In 1983, a Soviet research team led by Yuri Gorilov, a conservationist working in the Gobi, stumbled upon a clue that could explain the legend. They heard rumors that an old herder had actually captured a live Olgoi Khorkhoi near a remote oasis. Rushing to the scene, Gorilov saw movement in a hole and reached in barehanded, defying local warnings. What he pulled out was a fat, blunt-headed snake known as a Tartar sand boa. To Gorilov's surprise, every local Mongolian present identified the snake as the death worm itself. The Tartar sand boa is a non-venomous, burrowing snake about 2 to 3 feet long, with a thick body that could resemble a worm or legless lizard to the untrained eye. This discovery suggested that the terrifying worm might not be a worm at all, but rather a case of mistaken identity. Soviet scientists noted that the sand boa's appearance fit many descriptions: a stout, cylindrical creature that lurks under sand and occasionally surfaces, especially in wetter conditions. However, its very mundane nature stood in stark contrast to the deadly powers attributed to the Olgoi Khorkhoi. Still, not everyone was convinced by the sand boa explanation. No snake or legless lizard was known to spit acid or emit electric shocks, as the deathworm allegedly did. To believers, Gorilov's find explained only a fraction of the lore. They pointed out that tales of the Olgoi Khorkhoi predated scientific awareness of the sand boa, and that Mongolian nomads surely knew a snake when they saw one. Personally, I find that last part hard to believe, since they definitely thought that the creature they showed Gorilov was a real Mongolian deathworm. The first concerted effort to hunt the Mongolian deathworm came in the 1990s, just as Mongolia opened its borders after decades of isolation. In 1990, Czech adventurer Ivan Mackerly led a small team into the deepest reaches of the Gobi, determined to find the truth behind the legend. Mackerly, an engineer-turned-adventurer with a passion for unexplained mysteries, was inspired by Frank Herbert's famous sci-fi novel Dune. Taking a cue from the fictional sandworms of Dune and drawing upon his engineering background, his team built a motorized device. This machine pounded the ground rhythmically in hopes of drawing the subterranean beast to the surface. They roared across desert dunes in a Soviet-made off-road vehicle for 2 months, interviewing nomads and scanning the sands for any sign of the elusive worm. Locals couldn't even advise what bait to use as no one knew the creature's diet. So the team naturally resorted to creative tactics, like using explosives to try to scare the creature to the surface when their makeshift machine didn't work. Mackerly's 1990 expedition, though it didn't catch a monster, made a strong impression and raised the profile of this beast tremendously. Undeterred, Mackerly returned to Mongolia in 1992 for a second search, this time consulting local shamans for guidance and going fully down the Olgoi Khorkhoi hole. One shaman issued an ominous caution. The Olgoi Khorkhoi was no mere animal, he said, but a malevolent spirit of the desert. Interpreting what this shaman said, I think we may be able to infer that he meant something along the lines of, "Bro, it's definitely not real, but good luck." In 2004, Ivan Mackerly embarked on a third and final mission to the Gobi. This time he took to the skies in an ultralight aircraft, surveying the vast desert from above for any anomalous movement or tracks. From the air, the Gobi's expanse only reinforced how improbable it would be to find a single worm-like animal, if it even existed at all. Like the expeditions before, no hard evidence emerged. Mackerly, who had spent a good portion of his life chasing the death worm and other mysteries, admitted later in a 2007 interview that he had grown more skeptical about the creature. To date, every attempt to find this creature has turned up empty-handed. However, some still speculate that the Mongolian deathworm may be an animal that has yet to be documented by science. While it's universally accepted that the creature has had several layers of legend overlaid upon it, the fact that there may be a kernel of truth keeps adventurers searching. On September 20th, 2004, a group of walkers in the Yorkshire Dales made a grim discovery. Along a remote stretch of the Pennine Way between Pennygint and Horton in Ribblesdale, they spotted the body of a young woman lying in a mountain stream. No identification was found with the body, and local residents and police alike were initially baffled as to who she was and how she had died. In the absence of a name, the mystery woman came to be known as the Lady of the Hills, a reference to the rugged hill country where she was found. When detectives arrived at the scene in 2004, they noted that the victim appeared to be of Southeast Asian origin. She was approximately 25 to 35 years old and quite petite, just under 5 feet in height. She had shoulder-length dark hair and was found partially clothed, wearing only a pair of Marks and Spencer jeans and socks. The rest of her clothing, including whatever top or jacket she had on, was missing. A post-mortem examination indicated that she had been dead for 1 to 3 weeks before her body was discovered, meaning she likely died in late August or early September 2004. The initial autopsy could not determine an exact cause of death. Importantly, there were no obvious signs of violence, and investigators ruled out hypothermia as well. With no clear evidence of foul play at that time, police considered the possibility of a natural or accidental death. For years, the cause of the Lady of the Hills' demise remained officially unexplained, and the focus of the investigation turned toward identifying her rather than investigating a slaying. Identifying the young woman proved to be a daunting challenge. No one matching her description had been reported missing in the area or nationally at the time. Police pursued leads in the UK and even internationally, given the indication that she was likely from Asia. They released forensic artist impressions of her face and appealed to communities, including the possibility that she could have been a woman who was brought to Britain for marriage. In 2016, a cold case review unit of the North Yorkshire Police took a fresh look at the unsolved file. Advances in forensic science had been made since the early 2000s, and detectives hoped modern techniques might shed new light on the mystery. Indeed, over the next couple of years, investigators managed to piece together a more detailed profile of the unknown woman. Scientific tests supported the original hunch that she was from Southeast Asia, and other evidence began to suggest that her death was not due to misadventure. In 2018, the cold case team announced a startling conclusion. The Lady of the Hills had been slain. This marked a significant shift in the investigation. What had long been treated as an unexplained death was now officially something much more sinister. Detectives still didn't know the victim's name, but they had a strong suspicion about her background. They went public with a theory that she was likely a Thai woman who had come to the UK as the wife of a British man. By early 2019, those appeals finally yielded the breakthrough investigators needed. A BBC News article about the cold case, including details of the Thai bride theory, was widely shared and eventually reached a remote corner of northeast Thailand. There, a couple saw the report and a drawing of what she may have looked like, and immediately felt a jolt of recognition. The Thai family contacted North Yorkshire Police, telling them that they feared the woman in the Yorkshire Dales might be their missing daughter, Lamduan. Lamduan, they explained, had married an Englishman and moved to Britain years earlier. She had last been in touch with her Thai relatives in 2004, and then suddenly all communication stopped. The worried parents had heard nothing from her in the years since, and now, seeing the news from Yorkshire, they suspected the worst. Police moved quickly, and DNA samples were obtained from Lamduan's mother and father in Thailand and compared against the unidentified woman's remains. The results confirmed the parents' intuition. The Lady of the Hills was indeed Lamduan Armitage. In March 2019, North Yorkshire Police publicly announced the identification of Lamduan. She was around 36 years old at the time of her death, and, as it turned out, a married mother of 3 children living in England. With Lamduan's identity confirmed, attention turned to her backstory. Who was Lamduan, and how did she come to be in the Yorkshire Dales that September day in 2004? In June 1990, while in her early 20s, she met a British man named David Armitage in Chiang Mai, Thailand. David was working as an English teacher at the time, and the two fell in love and decided to marry. In January 1991, they were wed in Bangkok at the British Embassy. Not long after, Lamduan left her home country to start a new life in the United Kingdom with her husband. Lamduan's early years in Britain saw the couple moving around to different parts of the country. They lived in several places, including the city of Portsmouth on the south coast, the town of Rugby in the Midlands, and later the Preston area in the north of England. During this time, Lamduan became a mother, and by 2004, she had 3 young children, and the family was living in northern England. Friends and acquaintances recalled her as a petite, soft-spoken woman. According to information later given by her family, Lamduan worked for a time in a Thai restaurant in England. However, all was not well behind the scenes, and Lamduan's parents would later reveal that their daughter often phoned home in distress. In those calls, she confided that her marriage was troubled, and she allegedly told her mother that her husband, David, abused her. These deeply worrying phone calls continued up until 2004, when Lamduan suddenly stopped contacting her family. It appears that at some point that year, likely around late summer, she vanished from the life she had been living in England. No official missing person report was filed for Lamduan in the UK at the time. In fact, it later emerged that David Armitage never reported his wife missing to British authorities when she disappeared. This critical omission meant that when Lamduan's body was found in the Yorkshire Dales, there was no immediate link to any known missing person case. Lamduan's parents in Thailand also had no way to report her missing in the UK. They only knew that communication had ceased. Unaware of her fate, they spent years hoping for answers. Identifying Lamduan was a massive step forward in the investigation, but it also raised pressing questions about how she died. With the slaying now confirmed, detectives needed to piece together Lamduan's final movements and relationships. Naturally, attention focused on the person who knew Lamduan best in England, her husband David. In 2019, after Lamduan's identity was confirmed, David Armitage was located in Thailand, where he had been residing for many years. In fact, David had returned to Thailand not long after Lamduan's death in 2004. He went back to working as an English teacher, taking up a post at a university in western Thailand. By all accounts, he had built a new life there, and he had never been questioned by police, either in Thailand or the UK, about Lamduan's disappearance during the intervening years. As the case heated up following the 2019 breakthrough, North Yorkshire police made it clear that they wanted to speak with Lamduan's husband. He was, in effect, the last known person to see her alive, and the fact that he didn't report her missing raised serious suspicions. However, because David Armitage was overseas, British detectives couldn't simply bring him in for an interview without cooperation from Thai authorities. In public statements, David vehemently denied any involvement in Lamduan's death. In one interview with the press, he insisted he was innocent and claimed he had nothing to do with whatever happened to his wife. It was also reported that David had told people that Lamduan had, quote, run off back to Thailand in 2004, which he implied was why he hadn't alerted British police of her absence. To investigators, however, these explanations only raised further questions. Throughout 2019 and the years that followed, North Yorkshire police worked methodically to build their case. They liaised with Thai counterparts and navigated the legal processes required for an international investigation. Progress was slow, in part due to bureaucratic hurdles, and later because of the events of 2020 putting many plans on hold. It wasn't until early 2023 that a significant on-the-ground step was taken. In February 2023, a team of North Yorkshire cold case detectives and family liaison officers traveled to Thailand to advance the investigation. Over the course of about 2 weeks, they met with Lamduan's parents. They also worked alongside Thailand's Department of Special Investigations, conducting interviews throughout the country in places connected to Lamduan's past and David's present. By late 2024, nearly 2 decades after Lamduan's death, the investigation was reaching a critical point. Behind the scenes, authorities in the UK and Thailand coordinated to finally bring David Armitage in for questioning and in January 2025, Thai officials took action. David Armitage, now 61 years old, was detained by police in Thailand in connection with Lamduan's case. Specifically, on January 23, 2025, officers in Kanchanaburi arrested him on a UK warrant for Lamduan's slaying. This operation involved Thailand's immigration authorities as well, as David's visa status was reviewed and revoked, rendering his stay in Thailand illegal. He was taken into custody in Bangkok, while arrangements were made to deport him to the United Kingdom. According to official reports, once Thai authorities approved his deportation, David was put on a flight to London under escort. Upon arrival at Heathrow Airport, British police were waiting. David Armitage was immediately arrested by North Yorkshire Police on suspicion of the slaying of Lamduan Armitage in 2004. For 3 days, detectives interviewed him extensively about the events of 2004 and the circumstances that led to Lamduan's death. After those initial interrogations, however, the case didn't proceed as one may have expected. By February 4th, 2025, North Yorkshire Police announced that the suspect had been released on conditional bail while their inquiries continued. In other words, David Armitage was no longer in custody, but he remained under active investigation and subject to certain restrictions while detectives gathered further evidence. As of 2025, no criminal charges have yet been filed in the death of Lamduan, and the true nature of what happened to her remains unknown. I hope to have an update on this unsolved mystery in a future episode of this series.